how do you sort of make a hard currency or a relatively hard currency, or get assets out of the middle of nowhere? Well, I've seen something on this, and I think it was to do with Chile, I'm pretty certain. I'll talk first about bringing up capital, getting assets from nowhere, and then I'll explain how to do it with currency. How it essentially worked was they had all these slums, and back in the 1980s, you know, as happens in Nigeria with the slums, as happens in South America with the slums, they threaten to knock them down with a bulldozer sometimes and stuff like that. Well, these people had obviously, you know, had been there for a while, and they wanted legal title of their places. And you may have heard of the one in Johannesburg, the whopping big slum there, that people are protesting they don't want to be pushed out of it because they've been there for, you know, 15 years, 20 years, stuff like this. So what they ended up doing down in Chile or something like that, I'm pretty sure it was Chile. Don't know, it could have been Peru. I'll put it down in the description. They lobbied the government for getting legal title of their slums, so they weren't going to be threatened with them all getting knocked out, and to sort of make it legit before, you know, they come up with some plans to push them all out of these homes they'd been in for 15 years and built up and that. So they kept pushing the government about it, and eventually they said, rightio, well, we'll go ahead and do it. So they got people on scene, and eventually, yes, they got legal title of their properties. And this was all given the thumbs up by an economist who was working for the government, and the reason was he believed straight up that you could get capital out of these buildings. Now, these buildings had been there for long enough, and quite simply, all of a sudden you create all this, what was just pointless slums, is almost like not as pricey as suburban real estate, but, you know, you're heading in the same direction. So while all these slums are just, oh, they're slums, they're worthless, you know, if the government decides on a whim they're going to put a dozer through them, they'll put a dozer through them. To these places have legal title, you can legally own them, they have real worth and real value, and these buildings that were considered slums now have value, and this, you know, they've got, they can use them as backing and assets. Now I'm going to talk about currency. Well, how do you get a currency that's nothing more than printed toilet paper and make it worth something? Well, let's think of a little country that everybody hears a lot about. Let's think about Iraq. Well, what about Iraq? Well, if they had a currency, how would they make that from as good as toilet paper to actually worth something? What could they use as some sort of backing, some sort of an asset? Well, have a little think. What do you reckon they'd use? Oil. They could basically say that so many dinar, which tends to be one of the ones over there, could be, you know, their currency, X amount of dollars, dinar, whatever the heck, could be recouped for a certain amount of oil. And originally money was all like this. That's where the British pound come from. You could hand over £1 British note and receive from the Federal Treasury or whatever, London Treasury, a pound of silver in return. These things were basically promissory notes, which was just a note that looked legit, which would promise the handover of a pound of silver in exchange for £1 British. And that's how the British pound got its name. And you could do the same thing, but just write so many whatevers gives me this many barrels of oil. And that's it. And if Australia's currency was in a real strife, I don't know if you realise much about Australia, but let's just say we could probably back it with a basket of natural gas, coal, and iron ore. Now, there would be a few big, very rich, billionaires who would be severely pissed off that the government may have decided to tear up the lease contract on their mines, but it would save our currency because we would have backing. And I should do a little bit more on Australia and, well, we've got a lot to do with why China's producing all the stuff they produce. Between us and Brazil and some areas in Africa that are starting to mine for China, we're a lot of what fuels China. And also we were fueling Japan in the 70s, but that's a whole other subject. But that gives you an idea of currency and how to back it with something. And it's basically if the government decides that they're going to own all the oil in the ground, and they write a decree or a law or whatever that states that, here miners have, I think it's leases on their land, or a mining lease, but basically it's all legally written in, and that can be overturned and torn up, I'm quite sure. If there was enough of a point made of it, they could tip it all upside down. Better go to the High Court and go all blooming constitutional lawyers, but don't think that if they weren't pushed really severely hard, like full bloody collapse style, that they wouldn't turn around and actually do that. They probably would. And you'll all be surprised to notice that in my state, in a particular valley, 25% of world known reserves of brown coal exist in this one region. So yeah, that was government-owned power stations that have been sold off. I don't know about the coal, who technically owns that, but that wouldn't go too far. Australia's a bit of a backing, but it's generally not considered exportable. But hey, I'd swap money for brown coal, no worries.